If you are buying a property in Southern California, here are a list of things that you should do during your due diligence period to make sure that this property checks out. So I'm a real estate agent. I've helped hundreds of people buy and sell homes. And when I buy my own personal properties, these are the things that I do to make sure that I'm making an informed decision and to make sure I'm not overpaying for the home and just to make sure there's not too many risks in the property before diving into it. And so, there are a lot of things that come up on home inspections, et cetera, et cetera. So I'm just going to share with you some of the not so common things that people should think about when they are analyzing if a property is right for them. So the first thing you should look at is during your inspection period, if you're an escrow on a home, you really want to look into the sewer line. So there is a sewer line connected to your home where waste goes out, and then it's also connected to the city sewer where it goes out to the city's area. Now, sometimes if that piping is too old, it begins to crack or roots get inside of it, and you actually want to do an inspection where they'll stick a camera in there, they'll scope it out, and they'll make sure that everything is running smoothly there. So that's the first thing that I would look at. A lot of people are doing this nowadays when they're buying single-family homes. It's becoming more and more common, but not everybody knows about it, and it's a few $100s, and it's definitely something you should do before buying a home. Okay. The second thing that I would do is just make sure I'm really clear on the age of all the appliances. And if the major mechanisms are a little bit older, then I want to budget for or ask the seller to pay for, which they usually will, a home warranty plan for 1 year. So let me give an example. When you are touring the property, you are usually paying attention to the cosmetic things. You don't always pay attention to things like the furnace, the age of the air conditioner, the age of the water heater, etc., etc. Now, for me as a buyer, and I think this is most people, the furnace and the AC are usually the things that are really costly, big ticket items. So that's really what I'm paying closest attention to. Also the roof and also the piping, but in Southern California, a lot of the homes are newer here, and so we don't run into that as much in South Orange County where I'm at. But if you're buying in a home that is pre-1980, roof and piping is usually a major deal, so you want to look into those items as well. But I just want to be aware of the lifespan of these items. So an air conditioning unit, an air conditioning condenser, that big unit outside that has the fan, I've seen those last anywhere from 15 to 30 years. And the furnace, I've seen those typically last anywhere from 10 to 20 years. So if you're buying a home and the furnace is 15 years old, or the air conditioning unit is 20 or 25 years old, you're going to want to make sure to budget for a 1-year home warranty that includes air conditioning and furnace coverage. You usually have to pay a little bit more for that, but it's, works out to usually around $800 to $900 a year. And I believe you can pay that monthly, but most of the time, if you request it in your offer, the seller will pay for it. So that is what I would be budgeting for in my due diligence period, just making sure that I'm not going to have to replace the air conditioning unit right away, or the furnace. You also want to take a look at the insulation. That is that foam, looking or foil looking thing in your attic where the air actually goes through it. So it's also known as the ducting. So you really want to take a look at that, make sure that's not too old, make sure it's not cracked and there's air getting out of there, because that is something that could be costly to replace. And depending on the type of home you're buying, you might be in a multiple offer situation. So the seller might just say, hey, screw you if you want this home, you got to buy it as is. That is a very common thing and it's very unfortunate. But if there's a little bit less competition on the property, maybe you want to ask the seller for some concessions to actually have some cash on hand for when you might need to repair those things. So that is item number 2 in my due diligence period. Item number 3 is I want to pay really careful attention to the seller's disclosures. So in California, a seller is required to disclose to you anything that they know about the property that could be of material value to you. Now, because that is such a vague term, many realtors will advise their clients, hey, honesty is the best policy. If you think it could be an issue, disclose it to the clients. So if I'm a home buyer, I'm going to take a careful look at some of the seller disclosures, and I just want to see if there's any issues, if there were any deaths on the property, if there's anything I should be aware of, even things like, are there any nuisances in the neighborhood? They have to share that with you if they've had any like conflict with neighbors and stuff like that. So I think that'd be a good thing to pay attention to. I have often sold homes to people or helped people sell their homes where a neighbor was somewhat of an aggressor and somewhat of a nuisance, and so we had to disclose that to buyers, and they need to be informed about that to make a good decision, and you should be informed about that as well. For example, if you are somebody who is more private and you're buying in a neighborhood where there is, somebody that is a real nuisance in the neighborhood that's living right next door to you, that could be of material value to you. So that could be something to look into. Okay, another thing I would look into is if I'm buying a home with an HOA in it, I want to take a look at, number one, the HOA's financials, but I also want to take a look at the HOA's any upcoming assessments. So here's what we're seeing right now in Southern California. HOAs are doing one or two annual assessments on many people because they need to budget a little bit more for fire insurance so that they have sufficient coverage in case of a fire. Or they need to repair roofs, or they need to repair decks or whatever. And so we're seeing a lot of assessments, and we've seen the cost of HOAs actually get pretty high. I have a home for sale in Lake Forest, California. It's a condo, and the HOA is almost $600 a month. So that deters many buyers. So that is something that I would look into in my due diligence period. And if there's not a lot of activity on the property and the seller's really desperate to sell, I might ask the seller, hey, there's a $2,500 assessment coming up. In order for me to close this deal, I'm going to ask that you pay that, right? If you're wanting to negotiate with them, and maybe they say yes, maybe they say no, but you have to ask to know, right? So that is another thing that I would look to in my due diligence period. And those are really four things that I really would advise buyers to look into regarding their due diligence. And what you have to remember is, as a home buyer, it is your responsibility to do your due diligence. It is not your realtor's responsibility. It is not your lender's responsibility. It is not your mom or dad's or the seller's. It is your responsibility. You are making a long-term investment. Typically, people are pulling out a 30-year mortgage, and you are going to live in that home and make payments on it, presumably, for a long time. I'm not saying that everybody in the transaction doesn't have some responsibility, but the due diligence responsibility falls on you to really spend some time reviewing these documents, making sure your questions answered, and making sure you feel confident before moving forward. Here's my one tip for you. A lot of times, and what I see in this business, and this is one of the reasons I've stayed in real estate, is I see a lot of realtors like to be salespeople, but they're not very analytical. They don't like doing research, and they don't actually know the answers to some of the more complex things that buyers ask. And I'm not saying this to put this down. I'm just saying the typical personality profile is not super analytical for many realtors. It's more of a gregarious, kind of confident type of personality, right? So with that being said, what you should be doing is keeping a list of your questions and reaching out to your realtor and maybe share that list with them. And if you're not getting sufficient answers, explain that to them, and just say, hey, I don't feel like I'm really 100% confident in the information I'm getting in this. Do you think you could do some additional research for me and see if you can get me some other resources? And just politely ask them. And a lot of times they'll be willing to go above and beyond to try to help you. But don't just let your questions be silenced. Just make sure you're actually getting these before you make that long-term decision. So these are the things that I would do if I was buying a home to do my due diligence, make sure I'm being wise. And I'll give you just one last bonus tip. I always like to look at very carefully the last 12 months of sales in the neighborhood of the home I'm buying. The reason I want to do this is because even when I've bought my last 3 homes, I've purchased and sold 6 homes. And one of the things that I've learned about myself personally is I'm a little bit excited on day one of escrow, or when I'm writing the offer, when I'm looking at the home. And so I like to let a couple days go by to let the dust settle, and then I really take a deep look at the comparable sales and really see, and honestly, I've learned now to do this actually before committing to an offer is just spending a little bit of time with the comparable sales and making sure that I'm not overpaying for the home. So I hope this was helpful for you. If you have any questions, feel free to comment them below. Or if you have any tips that were helpful in you buying a property and you did some great due diligence, please share those with us in the comments below. Thank you again for watching this video, and I look forward to seeing you in the next one.